unless they're found on.
I did. I will not take credit. I did not. Where were they? Not very resourceful.
Do you have the Joint Committee on Racial Justice report prepared? Okay.
I can do it and then.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This would be the Executive Committee. Today is Tuesday, May 24th. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of April 26th, please? Thank you, Mr. Renaud, and thank you, Dr. Blair. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes as submitted? Seeing none, please vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously.
We do not, Mr. Chairman.
We'll go to informational items, beginning with Springdale. Any comment on Springdale?
Minutes of the February meeting are in your packet. I'm sure myself, Ms. Daly, or Ms. Pastucha can answer any questions.
Thank you. Do we have a report from the county auditor?
No, sir.
Seeing none, we'll move along. And then we'd be at our quarterly business development section.
So that's on page 12 in your packets. We are currently not servicing any loans. So CDAP and the Gap Loan Fund has an asset balance of just over $716,000. That is how much would be available to loan. Keystone has a little over $8.8 million in asset balance that could be available to loan if necessary in a project that would present itself.
Thank you. Dr. Blair, any comments?
The only comment I have is that we're losing out on opportunities by not investing in our local entrepreneurs and small business owners.
Thank you for the ongoing motivation. Appreciate it. I think we probably were all here for the discussions on Headington's financial statements or AR balance. Anybody want any more of that? Excuse me. All right. Scott, you have a update on the Joint Commission on Racial Justice and Equity.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. That's there's a synopsis found in your packet on page 15. Just a couple of highlights for the members and anybody in the audience or on the live stream. When the commission was created, you by appointment populated a steering committee and 8 subcommittees. Because they're subject to the Open Meetings Act, they have to take the Open Meetings Act training from the Attorney General's office. That was not available to them for over 8 months. They currently have a deadline of June 16th to get that completed because that just frequently opens. So compliance has been an ongoing task for the city staff and the county staff to ensure that the steering committee and the subcommittees are complying with the Open Meetings Act. Those of us that have been around local government for a while, that seems like that would be a pretty simple thing to do. But when you have 155 plus community volunteers who want to do things like create Google Sheets for crowdsourcing ideas, you have to remind them that you can't do that. From a process perspective, the steering committees created a process and a nomination committee to address vacancies on any of the subcommittees. They've acted on a number of recommendations from their nomination committee to fill slots as they've become available. They also established and implemented methods for each subcommittee to report back to the steering committee. This is actually pretty critical because unlike how we function, no member of the steering committee is on a subcommittee. So there's no direct linkage the way this committee has to the other committees of the county board. Different structure. From a strategy perspective, there's been quite a bit of effort put forth by the steering committee to keep the subcommittees from jumping immediately to solutions. The steering committee realizes that this is a long, engaged process, and it requires strategy first as opposed to just going straight to let's start trying solutions. You have to identify what are some ways, what are the reasons why the community has the issues that we have, and then create data points that can be tracked and measured, and then start looking at solutions that can affect those measurements. Along those lines, the steering committee has been working with the subcommittees to develop a set of data points that are specific to each one of those subcommittees. Those will be used to create a baseline for the strategic plan. King County, Washington, which is where Seattle is located, is one example, along with the city of St. Louis, Missouri, is another example that we'll use to create a dashboard that then can be made publicly available and is going to be updated and maintained by the city and the county at the staff levels. And we'll take advantage of tools like GIS or other data analytic tools that one or both of the local governments have. Lastly, in terms of strategy, the steering committee has been working on a race equity impact assessment tool that once created, they will make a recommendation to the county board and the city council that the two governments adopt and implement into our daily operations. And then upcoming, the steering committee actually meets via Zoom this evening at 5:30, and the full commission, so all 155 plus community volunteers, are going to be meeting on June 16th at the Civic Center. Exact time is yet to be determined, but it will most likely be in the evening. And what we'll be doing there is the steering committee and the community will hear for the first time the report of activities by each subcommittee in a formal sense, and then the baseline data metrics that each one of those subcommittees is going to be creating, and then having the city and the county track from the staff perspective. The steering committee co-chairs do meet monthly with the co-chairs of each of the subcommittees, and because I don't track all the comings and goings of the two steering committee co-chairs, I am confident, based on discussion that I hear every month at the steering committee meeting, that there is a substantial amount of one-on-one conversations that happen throughout the month amongst the parties. That's kind of where we're at right now. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to try and answer any questions the committee might have.
Thank you. Does Ms. Bryant have any comments, since you're our designee delegate?
I think Scott wrapped it all up.
Fair enough. Then I would see behind you Kate Pastuchis.
I was just wondering if you could tell us what those 8 committees are, the subcommittees?
Great question. Hold on one second. Because try as I might, I do not have them memorized. I've just got to bring up a file real quick here, so hold on. All right, so there is obviously the steering committee, there's the Justice Subcommittee, Economic Development and Jobs Subcommittee, Health and Human Services Committee, Quality Housing Subcommittee, Environment and Climate Subcommittee, Information Technology Subcommittee, Transportation and Mobility Subcommittee, and last but not least, Child and Youth Development Subcommittee.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up? Okay. Mr. Ricker.
First off, thank you, Kate, for the question, because my follow-up, I think, will tie in. The race equity impact assessment tool, I was going to ask for a little more scope maybe around it. Was it demographic tool, or is it taking each of the pieces of these subcommittees and having metrics coming out of them? If you could share any knowledge you have as to kind of what's the scope of that, so as we move forward, we know what to anticipate.
It's a good question. I had something similar in my mind.
Great question. Let me open up my notes on that. Let's make sure this is. Let's see here. There we go. So it would come to you in the form of an ordinance once it does get done being drafted. Opening the document, there we go. So its purpose in its current draft form, so subject to change, identifies a mission of the commission, which is to accelerate efforts to institutionalize racial justice and equity within county and city government and to advance its adoption throughout the region. The adoption and the required use of the assessment tool would be in developing, implementing, and terminating county policies, programs, services, plans, and budgets. Let's take a look and see. So how are they going to do that? There are a series of questions that we would add. We'd create a form that would we would consider. Those include, but this may not be an exhaustive list. One, how does the action advance racial or other equity in the community? Two, have we analyzed the impact this action will have upon underserved communities, members of marginalized groups, or classes protected by law? What is that impact? What is your data and how was it developed? Have you reached out to receive feedback from each affected community? What was their input? Have you considered alternative approaches to this action which would better promote equity? What, if any, additional resources would be needed to promote equity through this action? So, Mr. Ricker, that's the current draft of what the intent behind the tool would be. Like I said, still in draft form, and so that may yet change.
Mr. Ricker?
Yeah, I guess I'll have to think it through more, because what I hear is you classify it as both for the county government and the city government. These are aspects we would look at when we make actions or decisions or resolutions. Everything that we do would have to go through the filters of how does it impact each of those assessed areas. Is that, am I interpreting that right, or is there a piece
Right, that's correct. So what we would do is we would integrate that into the agenda briefing process, and maybe would add a whereas clause in resolutions. You know, let's take for example, a land split that comes through Mr. Dillon's committee. That's probably a pretty quick and easy analysis to do, especially one that's, say, in the rural portions of your district, or Mr. Rosenbaum's district, or Mr. Fennell's district, or even Ms. Gross Allison's district. It's going to be pretty straightforward to do that analysis. I would argue it's even going to be pretty straightforward to do that analysis, say, on when we're deciding on, during the annual budgeting process, which road projects we're going to do on an annual basis, because we do things like using our pavement condition analysis or index analysis to make those priorities, and when federal and or state money comes available for road projects. And so, there will be additional criteria that we look at in addition to what I just walked through. Where you may see it more heavily used is going to be maybe in some of the decision points and policy decisions that either come before you from the health department or to the Board of Health that maybe don't reach the level of this body, but would be a policy decision within their own spending authority at the health department and the Board of Health. Both the city manager and I are still trying to work through, how to operationalize this, and that's why it's still in draft form.
Okay, that's all.
Thank you. Other members? I guess my question, Scott, is does this, and I'm just thinking of what other people might be thinking of, so I'll ask the question, is this a non-binding or a binding lens through which we would be adopting something with the city jointly?
So it's currently drafted as an ordinance. We make every effort to abide 100% of the time by all of our ordinances, but many of our ordinances also have, when an appropriate situation exists, there are exemption clauses. A good example might be there is, if we can buy a squad car off of a state bid, we don't go out for bid for cop cars. We buy them off the state bid because that's a government procurement. Somebody's already procured those, and so we can take advantage of that pre-existing procurement. That would be an exception to going out for bid for those cars ourselves. So, Andrew, the way it's currently drafted, it's drafted as binding, but at the end of the day, it's a function of what this body wants to hold themselves to. So if you want to have, create exceptions that are justifiable, then we can certainly look at that.
Okay. Anyone else? Are we all done? All right. Could I get a motion, please, on the resolution that describes our investment in a Smart Start dashboard? Thank you, Dr. Blair. And a second from Mr. Rosenbaum. Thank you, Paul. Scott and Dr. Blair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the amount is $28,000. The recommended source is ARPA within your current appropriation of ARPA for the current year. We talked to you about this as an informational item last month. The Smart Start dashboard is something that the advisory committee that is chaired by Dr. Blair has been working on for a couple of months now. It's run by Lifting Up LLC, which is a local startup. What it does is it creates for lack of a better term, a digital one-stop shop for entrepreneurs that provide a 4-step process to getting their company in a position to be able to get prepared for either one of our entrepreneurship accelerators that are already existing in the community or other maybe rounds of funding. One of the key things on the backside of the dashboard is a concierge service. So many times entrepreneurs don't know when they should start consulting an attorney, and maybe, for example, what type of company or corporation they should structure their business as, or maybe they need some assistance with various types of insurance that they should apply or obtain, or marketing assistance. The concierge service is structured such that those resources will be available to the entrepreneurs, and we will be partnering with both the Peoria Chamber and the other chambers of commerce within the community or in the county. So we know for sure that there's one in Peoria Heights, one in Chillicothe, and a couple others, where we will then work with those chambers to identify chamber members in each one of the concierge categories to then populate that back end of that service. And it's still going to be a service for a fee from that service provider to the entrepreneur, but it's set up in such a way that it maximizes the resources for the entrepreneur, as opposed to going down a path that is both wasteful in time, money, and effort for the entrepreneur. It's a 3-year agreement. As I said, the first year is $28,000. The second year is $25,000. The third year is $25,000. Dr. Blair, did I leave anything out?
The only thing I'd add is that because we're working with them and we're one of their early clients, we can help build out features that we find important for our entrepreneurs and small business owners. So that's something that's really nice to be able to do. So it's not a cookie cutter thing. It can be very useful for us to help build out information, this platform. And then the other thing is that the back-end data metrics that we can get is going to be incredibly helpful for not only Peoria County, but we can decide what metrics we can share with our partners who are part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Thank you. Others? Jennifer.
So I have 2 questions, I guess, for either one of you. One, is there any member of Peoria County staff solely designated to this?
At this point in time, no. So at least in terms of managing the back end of it, that's part of what the fee pays for. Where effort will be needed is working and coordinating with the multiple chambers of commerce to create the list of concierges.
And the other question is this only for startups and entrepreneurs, or did I hear you mention small businesses can jump in to build their business? Is that right?
Absolutely correct. It's mostly for the startups and early entrepreneurs, but the way the dashboard is structured, medium stage, not full mature, but partially mature companies and entrepreneurs will benefit from this.
Mr. Dillon, then Ms. Pastusha.
So Dr. Blair, it might have been covered in a previous. So we create this dashboard. We're paying for the dashboard, working with the chambers to try to do it. So I take it that this is a regional thing where even though we're paying for it, if business in Morton wants to come Google and that's the first thing they see, we would have businesses from the region using the dashboard that we paid for?
If you want to.
What we considered was, what we're considering here, though, is that even if it's someone from Morton, they're going to be utilizing Peoria County services. This is something that's going to benefit Peoria County, because even if they perhaps live in Morton, they might set up their business here. They may be using these concierge services here. It's still going to benefit Peoria County. It's going to be very hard to prevent people outside Peoria County from using this. Nor should we, because I think we'll benefit from it.
Thank you. Who's else? Hand did I see? Kate.
So we give money to the Greater Peoria EDC. What's their involvement in this?
So the EDC has 2 members on the advisory committee that Dr. Blair chairs. So they've been an integral part of the discussion and shaping the scope of work for how we want this developed, and I'm sure they'll continue to be involved from a process improvement perspective as well.
That's a great question, Kate. Paul?
Is there any chance any of the other counties would want to partner with us to make it a regional thing like Tazewell, Woodford, any of the other ones? Because if the other people can use it, maybe they won't want to partner right away, but if we make a success at it, that we could get these other counties to partner with us on this.
Certainly a possibility. We haven't reached out to any of the other counties right now. As we shared last month, the dashboard is currently being used by the Morton Chamber of Commerce. So businesses in Morton and the immediate surrounding area already have access and are already using it. The other location where they're currently at is Muscatine, Iowa. So obviously, that opportunity exists in the future. I think from the advisory committee's perspective, they wanted to move ahead just because there are enough, I think, Peoria-based businesses or that would use the dashboard or would be on the concierge service side of things that we'd be looking to most benefit our entrepreneurs first.
Good question. Ms. Pastucia?
Sorry, one more. So we have the Innovation Hub, which has been called or named the Distillery Labs. Is this a part of that?
No, it is not a part of Distillery Labs, but it is something. It's a tool that entrepreneurs and younger businesses could use as a gateway into other services that Distillery Labs will be offering. It's also going to be, Distillery Labs will be one of the concepts that we've talked about as you go through the 4 steps of the process is getting some type of digital passport. Distillery Labs is most likely one of the entities that would be willing to provide a digital stamp to your digital passport. Think of them along with the SBDC, the Minority Business Development Center. Those are service providers that the dashboard will point you to if you're an entrepreneur.
Mr. Ricker?
I guess my perception is there's a linkage to funding potential out of Keystone to fund or grant some of these entrepreneurs. Could you maybe give us a scope of how that linkage works and the scope of that? So are we funding people outside of the area, inside of the area, if their business starts here? Let's be clear so we're not misleading potential users as to the opportunity for funds from the county. So
the funds tied to this resolution is essentially for software as a service. So there's other than which will go to Lifting Up LLC, which is a local business here in the region. Any other expense, whether it be out of Keystone or CDAP, would come to you as a separate vote for direct investment into a company. And under your own current policies, you're only going to invest in Peoria County-based businesses. That board at that moment in time may choose to waive that, like we talked about in the previous item, but the way your policies are today, you're only going to make direct investment into companies that are based here in Peoria County.
So do we make reference to the potential for grants when we put this dashboard out as a enticement to the people to use the dashboard and to funnel in?
I don't want to talk about grants before we approve them. So that could be a piece of this if the board decides to approve these micro grants that we've talked about before. Part of this will be a communication strategy on how we launch this, and we'll have to make decisions on what that looks like later. But if we're going to say that we want to have grants, we need to have those approved before we say them.
I think some part of the question is those public sector economic development funds, let me just put under that label, on the books of Peoria County will be for businesses in Peoria County and grant concepts for businesses in Peoria County. Is that what we're agreeing to?
Correct.
Okay. Is that the clarity? Okay. Good discussion. Anyone else? We all done? You good? Okay. All those in favor, please vote. Please say aye. What am I doing here? Any opposed, same sign? Thank you for being well trained. All right, we'll write that down as unanimous. I want to welcome to the stage our sheriff. Welcome, Brian. You can take that microphone. If it hums too much, you could just come sit where Mr. Elsasser normally does.
Am I humming?
Yes.
I will.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I come in peace. This conversation actually started with Mr. Rosenbaum because I called him last week relative to the current staffing issues we're seeing at the jail, and for whatever reasons, I do think this is a better venue to have more board members present while I kind of speak these through. I don't want to talk how we got there, how we got here, but I just have to be transparent to the board as well as our community about the current position we're in. We have crossed that threshold. I've been saying for some time now, it's coming, but the jail staffing has hit that line of demarcation that I can't figure out this riddle. And this is a riddle I've been working on even before COVID. And I know there's other industries with these same problems, but I just want to kind of put this in context, what we're dealing with right now. Because we put a lot of things in play. We've got, obviously we have longevity bonus, retention bonuses. We have onboarding bonuses. We're recruiting specific at our junior colleges as well as our four-year universities. We are using Indeed. We're using LinkedIn. We're using all the web sources we have. But the situation that I see in is the competition in this industry it's really making it so difficult to hire for the jail versus law enforcement. When you go to a four-year university, you're dealing with students that are graduating that don't want to start in the entry-level jail position. They want to be on the street. And to put this in perspective, there was a PTI class that started 2 weeks ago. And I'll use Peoria City for example. They had 25 slots for this PTI class in Champaign. They filled five of those positions. And the perspective is, if they can't get the law enforcement positions filled, you see the struggle I'm having with the jail. The law enforcement position pays at a much higher compensation rate. It's the Hollywood version. You're on the street. There's more freedom. So our current staffing right now, we're down 20 positions out of 76 FTEs. In addition to, we now have 7 employees off on some form of either IOD or medical. So that's 27 out of 76. Forecasting known retirements just even in the next 60 days. We will be below 50% staffed by the end of summer. Compounded by, we now hit the season that relief factor is an issue as well. Most employees save their vacation for summer months. And we can't deny because of CBAs to let the people off that have accrued time. Compounded by, from a historical perspective, your jail ADP typically rises 20 to 25% in your summer months. I need help, and I'm not expecting solutions, but I think we have to be public at this level to acknowledge this. a good comparison might be is what the hospitals went through during COVID, where you had to rethink your business and what you allow in. But every solution I come up with, there is so much collateral damage, and I don't even know what the long-term damage is. For example, the Fed detention. That's right now where we're running between 40 to 50 feds on a weekly basis. That's a whole housing unit. So that would reduce staffing needs by one housing unit, which would be weekly 4.5 FTEs. The downfall to that, though, I don't even know if the feds have anywhere to send their prisoners because they do not have pretrial facilities. So even if we said we're out of this business, it might be 6 months before we start getting transfers out of the building. And real relationship. I think if you get out of that business when we need it in years to come, because it is a dedicated revenue source, well over $1 million a year, I don't think long-term damage there that it could hurt us. Sign-on bonuses right now for corrections is if it's a lateral transfer, and we do save money on these because of the training costs that we don't have to pay when we have someone that's already certified, is at $10,000. Just here in the last month, we've had employees return the sign-on bonus because they can't sustain working in this model. And that's another part of this. When you're so far understaffed and the required workforce, the mandatory positions you have, you're bringing a new employee in, and for their first 4 months of life, they're going to do 80 hours a week. There's no ramp up to this is all they see. And I think they're seeing, is there an end in sight here? And when you have competition, you don't have to stay. Again, I'm here humbly. If I could figure out this riddle, we saw what happened in 2020 when we had to, because of the virus, limit intakes into the jail. We know what happened with community violence as well. It was a free-for-all. There was no accountability for actions. And so it's really hard to pull the trigger on that, knowing that the outcome will be, it's highly predictable. We've been there. It's just 2 summers ago. We saw what happened when we did non-custodial arrests for certain offenses, and we limited our exposure at the jail. This is far-reaching. It affects every law enforcement agency in the county. Peoria City, a bigger agency, they won't feel it as much, but a Bartonville, a Chillicothe, Peoria Heights, Elmwood, when you only have one officer in the street and they have to wait 5 hours to get their person received in the jail, that community has no police presence. We're using deputies. We've been paying double time on all overtime, and that has kept the force overtime down because people volunteer. The way it works is if you get your time and a half if it's forced, but if you volunteer, you get double time. We're using certified patrol deputies that's worked in the jail prior for that as well. The other impacts we're seeing is all this is correlated that when you have less staff, you have less programs and services, you have more altercations and incidents in the jail, which creates more off-site medical care. We have one individual in the hospital. We have potentially another one going. That's a federal that takes 2 officers to sit with them 24 hours a day. And we don't have the staff. And we've hit that point, and again, with known retirements, just retirements, but like every business, you get the water cooler talk too about potential resignations. That's why I know we're going to be well past the threshold here, probably in the next 30 or 60 days. So my ask, and I kind of talked to Scott offline with this, is I don't have the answers, and I'm looking at this from a micro situation. It's a macro problem. It's not just here locally. Everyone's at different levels. Story from last week at Department of Corrections, Hill Correctional Center in Galesburg, where an employee due to the forced overtime, actually filed an unlawful restraint report with the state police because he was not allowed to leave the facility. This speaks in volumes. It's not just us. And I've told you, we'll figure out patrol. We're not 100% staffed on patrol, but that it's manageable. We can work this. We had a test this morning. We had 4 good applicants for patrol, and half of those were laterals from other agencies. The jail's not. I saw an article over the weekend about ghosting. We're seeing a lot of those where we get up to that point. You make the job offer, and they just don't show up for day one. Our last resignation, he made it one day, and he never came back. And again, I'm here humbly to see if there's collective brain power to help figure this riddle out, and because we need it. And I whoever replaces me, you could be George Patton or Eisenhower, you're still going to have that same problem, because this is a macro problem in every agency. I don't think it's talked about as much as the officers on the street, because that's what the public sees. But when you realize the jail is really the backbone of the whole system, we're having increased litigation, and most of it's frivolous, but there's an impact on the state's attorney's office, and they can attest to that as well, that we're going to see more. When you lock your detainees down 24 hours or 23 hours a day, there's a lot of anxiety, stress, anger, and you're going to see more of the frivolous lawsuits, which take time, money, and county tax dollars. So there's so many pieces to this. And again, I'm asking for help. And if I had the solution, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And if you look at it from a historical perspective, this really started before COVID. You saw reduction in recruitment and retention in this profession for at least the last decade. It sped up. It sped up when you have a lot of people of age that leave, but then that's where the competition has really hurt the jail staffing, when every law enforcement agency is targeting the same employee segment. Those employees whose end goal was to go to the street anyway don't need that middle ground. Our system before, you had to get life skills, you had to grow up, you had to, and I still believe it is the best training you have to put someone on the street. But that's no longer an option they have to take. And even just on the compensation side, it makes no sense. Why would you work here for a lesser amount in a potentially a harsher environment, because you can't get away from it, you're enclosed, versus being on the street where you still have freedoms throughout your day. You can go to McDonald's for lunch, you can meet your family for lunch, there's other job satisfactions on the police side that you don't have. And Mr. Rand, and I know your business, you're going through similar things, but we have to realize stakes are a little bit higher in certain professions. And I don't know how this will end. Myself and the undersheriffs, me and Doug have this talk every morning. He's part of my reason I need another one, because what do you got, another month? June 30th. I've always said, get us to the recession. Not that I'm hoping for a recession, but I think I saw this in 2008, 9, 10, when I was jail superintendent, that we had the applications at that time. But everything that we look and we discuss and we talk, whether it's just at ICC or we talked an exit strategy, I don't even know if that's going to solve our problem with the jail. And what I would ask, and I don't know at what level we would do this, is this has to be more immediate. I know we're doing a strategic analysis. There's going to be a vendor looking into that. I know what the answer is going to be, though. And if they have solutions, we'll take them and we'll put anything into play. But I think this is a talk that we have to have multiple stakeholders, whether it be elected officials, but you need system stakeholders, the chief judge, the state's attorney, myself, the chief of police for our law enforcement agencies, City, Chillicothe, Bartonville Heights, probation, as well as those that have maybe more decision powers or authority to make more, what I'll say, pivot decisions that we can do this if it's dealing with compensation. But we're at the point, it is dire, and it will affect every law enforcement agency. And attrition leads to more attrition, and that's definitely the case that we're seeing. So I'll yield at that, but I would continue this conversation if the dialogue, if anyone has ideas or what potential next steps could be.
Thank you, Brian. Comments? Mr. Rideau.
I have a question. How flexible do you see the union being as far as creativity?
For them, there was no even questions asked when we were using patrol in the jail. We do now have, just today, we have an exempt employee that used to be a jail tech that's offered to come down and work tech hours. They say thank you. There's no pushback from the union. We actually had the PBPA rep out yesterday on an unrelated subject, but it led to conversations. And again, we're not alone. Different jails are at different levels. Locally, if Sheriff Lauer is here, he'll acknowledge it's a problem, but it's not as critical as what we're seeing, Tazewell versus Peoria. We have to face Peoria it's a different environment, it's a different jail than our surrounding counties. There's more violence in Peoria, and you have more internal issues inside the building. So it's hard to pull someone from Tazewell County to do a lateral over here when they see potentially a harsher environment. It's not worth when the money's about to wash, you know, and that's where they live, and they got residents and everything else. But no, the unions will work with this. They're looking for help too. I mean, you've got a depleted workforce, and again, when you're this far down, what we're seeing, even when we hire someone, it's hitting them like a ton of bricks when they walk in, because you see the amount of overtime and your whole life is dedicated. It's like going to boot camp. You're totally submerged, and you really can't put a timeline on it. So that's all they see. And when you have these, they're going to get the call from the other agency. They'll start testing day one, or they're already on the list. They're doing this just as a filler for a couple months. Had some success for spring session with the legislators. One of the solutions, again, longer term solutions, and they're doing a pilot program. Representative Vail, I think, out of the Rockford area, is doing the pilot up at Sauk Valley Junior College. Training standards. I've never understood why we make someone go to school for 4 years to just send them to the academy for another 18 weeks. Why don't we have a curriculum with all the new legislation entered into basically an apprenticeship program, a work-study program? Work with your junior colleges throughout the state, so when you graduate, in lieu of going to the academy, you're certified. It's an idea I think they like. There's other states. Florida has a similar program. But the angle I was on that one was to hopefully lower the age requirement for corrections. And there's only one reason we have the age of 21. It's the firearms component that's a state requirement, which makes no sense to me, because post-academy, it's not a requirement for the job, meaning you have to qualify and go through the 40-hour mandatory, which you have to be at the age of 21 to possess a handgun. That's the reason. But once you come back to your workstation, you don't have to be weapons certified in corrections. I don't believe an 18-year-old is ready for this job, but I believe you can put them in certain environments. You have those internal control mechanisms where you can keep someone working in an intake area where there's additional workers around you. It's more of a group environment versus a housing unit. And the play that I was trying to do with the junior college, with the work study, where you could bring these 18 years olds on a part-time basis, you would have a constant workforce, but you'll have a lot of turnover. And at this point, yeah, we'll take that. We'll take that knowing if I'm only going to have someone for 3 years, 18 to 21, you have that constant rotation. Again, being devil's advocate, there'll be consequences of that, because then I look, well, what happened 10 years down the road with leadership, supervision, if you have that constant turnover. So there's no true solution. That's one step of it, and I'm glad to see that. I'm glad to see that the legislators are at least taking some action there to pilot this. But that's not going to help us in June, July, and August. Yeah, more questions?
Is it possible to offer almost like substitute teachers, where you have somebody from outside come in temporarily for a couple days, or freelance? It could be anybody that has credentials of National Guard people. And then, since we're not paying benefits, pension, that we could offer a higher salary for temporary work.
Again, that's going to take legislative or a Let's Be board to make us a change in policy. You have to have that certification. So even if you were an MP in a reserve unit, you wouldn't have that state certification here. So that's at a higher level. These are things that we brought up too. Call in the Guard. Call in the Guard. We need relief, and that is the biggest thing that I see right now. The staff needs time off. They can't sustain you got this vacation. Money's not. I mean, they're being compensated. They're working for it. They're taking the double time on the overtime. It takes some of the burn out of it. They're making more money than they ever have, but they're still leaving because they can't sustain this. And I brought up before, yeah, marriages, it's come to the point where work or the family will find another job someplace else, workplace satisfaction. No, Rob, if that's a bigger conversation, and I know this is, part of my intent to even, and I've had talk with different legislators, but it's more of a global talk, and I think you're going to have to see that even at the state corrections level, because we're stealing them too, because they have an opportunity to go to a police job versus corrections. So they're taking those. So you're seeing those. Law enforcement will be figured out. That's the easy part of this. It's not there, but it's a lot easier of an issue than versus the corrections. We've talked about this. Even if I raise the sign-on bonus, devil's advocate, now you potentially could be alienating your other employees, the ones that we hired 6 months ago or a year ago, and they're going to be upset. You signed on for X, and I got this. You're making it's a Rubik's Cube, and I can't figure those out either.
Kate?
I guess what I'm hearing is that we're paying one person 3 salaries to do 2 jobs. So how much money are we losing from our originally budgeted FTE positions to operate in that way?
We're not losing any money, right? With my budget right now, this is a budget. Money is not the issue.
No, I understand, but you're forcing people to work an 80-hour-a-week schedule. They're getting paid.
Yeah, on their overtime,
So they're getting paid 3
double
salaries, basically. And if I get into the realm of things we can't talk about, let me know. But wouldn't it make more sense to pay one person 1.5 of that to work 40 hours a week?
That's the dilemma.
So I know that we can't talk about negotiations of salaries and things in open meetings, but That's what
maybe
I-
I'm saying this the wrong way, but this is why I'm here saying that is the problem. That's where we want to be. We want to have the limited overtime. We just don't have the staff. We're down 20. If you look at our IODs, 27 out of 76 employees. With your relief factor, so you add another, at a minimum, between comp, personal, and vacation time, that's another 9 employees a day. So you're at 27, so what's that? 36 out of 76. You're working 40 employees. And then you have a week like this where I know summer camp, where we're dealing with the city, and this is where it's so difficult for me to talk about, knowing with the increased violence. We need to be out there getting the guns off the street. We need to be doing certain things. But the collateral damage is when the city does their roundups and they arrest 50 people, I don't have the capacity to hold them. And when we have these loads come in on a weekly basis, I'm getting more employees saying, I'm done. We can't manage it. So
So
no, that's,
when-
again, we need the employees, and that's the basis of this conversation.
When people are leaving, it sounds like they're leaving because they're being overworked. What kind of salaries are they going to? Do you know? There's lots of jobs out there, so I don't know what kind of salaries are.
It's not just salaries. That's a big conversation. It's total packages, compensation packages. It's whether it's benefits, it's retirement, stock options. Again, the competitive forces right now to be someone looking for a job, you can write your own ticket if you're willing to work. You can go where you want. You have a lot of creativity. I've had this talk with the state's attorney. I mean, we're dealing with the post-COVID with where people got used to remote work, and that's now not. That's a want. I mean, it's a mandate. They want that, and they have that opportunity because there's companies that'll take advantage of that too. It's certain industries. It's going to be, and I have my own theory for all of this. And I'm part of the problem where I raised my kid with the Xbox and the PlayStation as their babysitter, but we have a whole generation, maybe 2 generations of them now employees that grew up behind screens, laptops, phones. They grew up behind screens. So when you're asking them to go into a workforce where there's interpersonal communication, now add conflict on top of that, they're not interested. They're not wired that way. And that's why you see it at the macro level everywhere where they're having problems with nursing, teaching, police, corrections, EMTs, fire. It's a bigger conversation. But I'm just trying to get us through November? No, sorry. Long term. And the other thing at play, and we're trying to figure this out, Judge Gorham, we are having a stakeholder meeting just to start working with the Safety Act conditions, which a lot of these go into play January 1st, and there's a lot of work involved there too. New positions, new responsibilities. So you're trying to shuffle all this around at the same time where you're trying to manage your tornado every day with a depleted workforce.
Jennifer.
You may not know this, but what would the number of bodies be to help so that somebody coming on isn't required to work 80 hours? I'm not saying how many people do you need to make it perfect, but how many people would help that immediate overload?
If I could cut my at 50% right now, so if we have 20 vacancies, the 10. But I think this is a multi-pronged conversation. It's you just can't rely on we're going to get these employees in, because if that was the case, I think we already would have had them. We've put a lot out there. This has been the primary focus now, really since COVID too. When we started seeing this decline, we really concentrated on recruitment and retention efforts. So the multi-facet report is, yes, primary concern is recruitment and retention. Additionally, you have to look at limiting who comes into the facility. Do we put guidelines in again, knowing there's going to be collateral damage, lowering the population till it's manageable, so you get your ADP down. So the only cards I hold on that one that I can control, we've worked through. The DOC hurt us over the 2 years when we had this high population. Good news though, we are getting paid. Bad news is right now it's at $8 a day that we're getting for when it costs us $120 a day to do this. That's still in talks, but money's not the issue right now. But I can't speak what happens 2 years down the road if there is a recession. We're all smart. We're all adults. There's going to be future economic problems. Just going through the jail yesterday, you saw the capital needs. We can't fix that with all the money we have right now. These are hard decisions, and I guess maybe it's maybe I'm asking for help because I don't want to be that guy to make all these decisions, because I do think we need input from all the stakeholders, and we got to have buy-in from all the stakeholders as well. I have to have our law enforcement agencies to understand this is the situation at hand, and we need cooperation.
Other members? I want to thank you, Sheriff, for your positive presentation of the challenge. I don't know what to do next. I'm sure members here want to talk to you. I want to talk to you. But let's figure something out before our next regularly scheduled board meeting to have a conversation about what it is we're prepared to do. And since I don't see anybody else's hands, I'll just kind of leave it there with you. I appreciate everything you've had to say
No,
today.
I just, out of sake of transparency, that's what I was hoping to hear, that collectively, let's go back to the table, but I just want to know it's at that point where if we don't do something now, it will only get worse. It's worse, but it will only get worse, and that's all I'm asking is whether it's a task force, if it's collectively we get these stakeholders and force the issue and prioritize it. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I think we would be at the point where we're due a presentation from representatives from Good Energy. I know you'd rather. Yeah, how about taking that seat up here in the ring? It'll be a hum-free zone. Could I ask the vice chair to cover my post for a few minutes? Thank you. Go ahead. Welcome back, Charles.
Thank you. Actually, Mr. Salzer, you were here when we were first retained back in 2011 to do municipal aggregation. That's the aggregation of all your residents. The Peoria County, first of all, I'm joined here by Jared McMorris. He's our regional director based here in Peoria, and Tom Lay, our director of the Midwest. I'm Charles DeCastaja. I was here back when you made these decisions in 2011 for a first purchase in 2012. Peoria County is in a local buying group with 41 other communities. They include all the large communities in Tazewell and Peoria County, Mason, Marshall, Stark, Woodford, and some communities in McLean. This group has been buying together for 10 years. Over the last 10 years, there have been significant savings versus the utility. There also have been increased or enhanced renewable purchases. There has been budget stability. We were set to buy on the Monday after Easter, so Easter Monday. And there was an auction of the grid on the Friday before that, so on Good Friday. It's a crazy Easter energy weekend. And some of the capacity auction for one of the components in supply cleared at the highest levels in history. What that signaled to the market was that we're actually short generation right now. We're in the middle of a transition where we have supply chain issues. We've got foreign tariff issues, and obviously we have a global conflict which has run natural gas, which is one of the largest feedstocks for power, through the roof. So we got a message out on Friday to the 41 communities, to Scott Sorrell here, who always works on this program, and said, look, we're not purchasing on Monday. We don't even know if we have a supplier that'll write a contract, because it was kind of like a seismic event. We then thought maybe we would be able to purchase on Thursday of that week. The market came down 16%, but it was still in territory that, and we couldn't actually even get a contract. You know, this used to be the most desirable load. It is the most desirable load for a retail electric supplier, but in this environment, they just didn't really want to even write contracts. So our next communication, and I know you've seen some of our white papers, or they've been distributed. Our next communication was, we're not going to have a June renewal. So all the 115,000 customers in this region are going to go back to Ameren, the utility, for June. What I forgot to mention earlier was that on that April Monday, the utility purchased at the highest moment in 16 years. So we knew the utility rates were going to come in high, and obviously we can buy more strategically. The utility, a week after that, published its rates, and they were almost triple. And so you've seen the first white paper. The rates were going to about 12 cents on an annual basis. You're coming off a 4.3 cent contract, just to put it in perspective. Now, this is on the residential side. I could tell you what it's going to do to your large businesses, but I'm here to focus on what we can do and hopefully will achieve in the next 10 to 12 days if the market conditions get where we want them. Ameren then realized they actually had underpurchased for the summer and the following year, so they made a subsequent purchase last Monday. That purchase was even higher. They updated those rates late evening Friday. We got them. They moved those rates up again, so they've now restated the rates for June again. And then this morning, they finally came in with their last piece, which was a little transmission tariff. So we've then updated the rates again. So forgive me, Scott, you don't even have these new increases because they've happened in the last 48 hours, twice in the last 48 hours. We do have indicative pricing that we can get under the utility. The challenge right now is getting someone to give us a contract with it. And there really are only two that own generation, and they're the only ones who can or will even be remotely competitive. So, you know, we presented last night in Tazewell County on at the city of Pekin. We'll be at the city of Peoria tonight. We've now missed July, so the customers, the Ameren customers in the county, unincorporated, will have 2 months on with the Ameren utility rate. And if we can't get a deal by sort of Thursday, Friday next week, everyone will have to return for a minimum stay of 10 months. So for the rest of the utility year, because those are the laws. So we're hopeful that we're going to get a hedge that we're going to recommend. Usually we used to have these bid days where everyone would come down. There's a bunch of people in this room that were involved or their relatives were. Energy is so volatile right now that in certain days it trades like over a penny back and forth, and natural gas. I'm sure you're all aware of the inflationary environment we're in. The war is putting a tremendous amount of pressure on this situation, but we do feel that rates will come down, that this is not a time to buy for many, many years, but we need to get over the hump, and all of the very expensive pricing is right in front of us. Like, it's over 20 cents a kilowatt hour if you want June, right? And the further you go out. So the markets are backwardated. Also, the way the markets are settling is much lower than the forward purchases that are being offered. So we've been talking with the group. We've been communicating. We may have to get everyone together very, very quickly. I believe county administrator has authority to sign at a quick moment, and that's what we're going to have to do if we achieve it. If we don't achieve it, everyone's going back to Ameren until the end of next year. Doesn't mean the program will be over. It'll just be idle. And the reason we will be making that decision is because you will be better off with the utility. I know that's great news I brought you.
I assume you're finished?
Yes, ma'am, sir.
Thank you. So let me ask the question. Come June 30th, if my billing cycle began June 1st and ended June 30th, and I formerly was paying $125 a month for electricity, with the kilowatt hour cost you were describing, what would I have to pay for it for that month?
On with the Ameren utility,
Yes.
I'm going to ask Tom, who writes these white papers every day. Tom, what do you think the annual spend will be?
Just for that month. If my bill's normally $125 today, after we are hooked up to Ameren's generation contracts for the month of June, how much will my $125 bill go to?
Bill consists of distribution charges.
Yes, sir.
Not bypassable. I don't know the breakdown of your bill. In general, it's a rough rule of thumb, 50%, so about half of that is supply. So in very rough numbers, if it's $125, we cut that in half, 6250.
So,
Clean that 6250.
so you're going to divide by 2 and multiply by 3.
By 3, that's correct.
Okay.
This is off the top of my head, so.
That's is close enough.
Could verify more exactly if you'd like, but the, what Charles is, is referring to is, this is a stress for all ratepayers, no matter who their supplier is. So that's why the lowest rate, even if it's not one brokered by us, is what we want to, warn you about. We're trying to avoid that, and hopefully.
So I was using the illustration because I think when we talked about this a month ago, what I wanted to hear from was the aggregator, an explanation of what had happened, why they were not able to make the buy, and then what I'm trying to do today is break it down to common sense terms and think of your next door neighbor who has a $125 typical bill average throughout the year, and what that person, I think of little Mrs. Trees, may she rest, and what her new rate would be. So that's pretty substantial. You were talking about being locked out for 10 months. Would you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so that the utility, which apparently was caught unaware of the migration back this time because they had to make 2.5 purchases. So for the utility to be able to purchase, they need to be able to forecast load. So if you've come off a contract, and a residential customer can come off a contract from an aggregation or one of those programs I hope none of you have ever taken that you get in the mail, you in that 2 months that you've come off, you either have to make another election, do something else, and there's nothing out there, believe me, or if you don't, at that point, you have to stay for the next 10 months so the utility can sort of forecast the migration of load on and off. So it's called a minimum stay period, and it's the same for, there's different variation for it for natural gas, for commercial and stuff, but you have to stay back, till May
Thank you.
31st.
Anyone else have any questions for our friends from Good? Mr. Ricker.
For a layman, I guess, what would the duration of a buy contract be? And is there any renegotiation of, let's ballpark, it's a 24-month buy. You buy it at a rate today for 24 months. Are you locked in with no ability to reset
Right.
if the price?
Okay, so
the market
that actually
changes?
is the fundamental strategy. So the cheapest price, if someone would actually see the nominal value of these contracts have become so expensive that they only go to the highest, like the public board for approval. The cheapest rates right now, because there's actually no market, are like 60 months long. But you could overshoot the moon by a mile doing something like that. And even 40 months is ideal. What we're looking at is 28 months. 28 months would give us, if we purchased under the utility or in parity with the utility, it would give us 10 months of a known rate to compare against the utility with 18 months on the other side of it. It also wouldn't be too long that if the market came off significantly, we would be able to take advantage to what they call blend and extend. We would add additional term and blend the rate down. So if we went too far, we could, so that is kind of in the strategy. You don't buy, I mean, well, here's the other thing. We could buy very short. Everyone would have to pay much higher rates than the utility, gambling to see if the market drops. But we're not in the gambling business, and we can't be for the ratepayers. It's either we can beat the utility, which is your default provider, or you're with the utility. I will make another comment just because I think it's important. I'm going to say it tonight at the city. If you think the economic destruction is going to be bad on the residential side, on the large commercial side here, it's going to be devastating. Because one of the components that's in electricity called capacity went up 47 times. All of the large users in Southern Illinois have never locked that in. They've floated it because it's been free. So that's coming, and I don't need to use the proper names that you know of, but just imagine. So it's going to be a real big deal, and you've probably already read a lot about it in the papers, but it is coming.
Anyone else? First I saw Jennifer, then Rob.
In terms of residential, we'll know more at the end of next week. Did I catch that?
Yeah, we'll know by the end of next week whether we were able to achieve this or not. And then the ratepayer in the county will obviously be messaged that this is coming. The first time they'll get that first bill, which will be the Ameren bill, which will be in the middle of July. But we've already been putting out, actually there have been a lot of joint press releases put out in Tazewell and Peoria that this is the same for all of downstate Illinois. And I can't even tell you what's going on up in Chicago. It's a whole nother world. But.
Mr. Renaud?
Of the other half of the bill that isn't usage, are any of those county fees that we collect?
No, those are the non-bypassables. So those are the charges that Ameren, as a monopoly, gets to service the poles and wires, and if they want to raise those rates, they have to petition and file for a rate of return issue for building or whatever the case may be.
Mr. Fennell?
On the optimistic viewpoint that next week you will be able to find a favorable rate, we have in place the procedures that you can accept it or whatever, and,
Yes,
and Scott can go ahead and sign on behalf of the county, and we can go.
Right.
We don't have to do anything else tonight to do that.
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Fennell. Like Mr. Testa said, we've been doing this for about a decade. Our second contract, which was roughly 7.5, 8 years ago, we put in a provision that allowed the county administrator to lock in the rate in its most favorable terms. Normally when we go through a bid day, we have roughly a 2-hour window to actually execute a contract when the pricing is valid for. And so we've been using that for multiple contracts now, and that is still in place. And we'll, if the opportunity presents itself next week, we'll do the same.
Anyone else? Charles, I missed the first couple of minutes. I had to step out for a second. Did you discuss the whys here, why we're in this situation?
Everyone's in it. I mean, all of a sudden, the energy market spiraled out of control, starting with the third week of February, when natural gas became very tight globally and very tight here. And also in this region, we had plant retirements that were scheduled properly. We also had renewable energy coming in that was scheduled properly. Our renewable energy schedules fell behind in this region, and really the grid sort of signaled that the retirement should continue, and we got caught right in the middle of it. And it's not like this MISO auction that created this situation. It's not just here, it's 11 states. It's like a quarter of the United States is in this. And to be totally honest, you're now starting to pay what they pay in the East, right? These are like, they pay 18 cents in Massachusetts. You've been paying 4.5 here. Maybe we can get you to 12 or 10 or whatever, but we're not going back to 4.5. There's definitely a new floor. So, I mean, I could talk a lot about solar panels and tariffs and China and all, there's a lot of little pieces, but it all happened at the same time.
Mr. Ricker?
Thank you. There's always the two elements, supply and demand. You're doing a great job giving us the supply challenges, if it's natural gas capacity. What have the demand signals been as far as usage of electricity? Has that gone up? Has it been kind of flat year over year? I know it's a seasonality thing, but what do you see there?
Well, actually, there was more demand in this region before 2008. And so when what they call the global financial crisis happened in 2008, a lot of industrial demand, which was actually never replaced. So for a very long time, you had too much generation here. And you were the recipients of very, very low prices because generators would just keep bidding lower and lower just so they could sell their load. And now and then when regulatory events happened and that older generation was required to do X to stay and it didn't pencil out, they started to signal for retirements, and now we have less generation than we need. But markets generally solve, so you don't just have to be in MISO to bid in your capacity, and if it's paying more in MISO, the people in PJM are going to, their generation at some point, and that's why we firmly, that's why we had a contract for you on Easter Monday. It was just 6 months and it was 20 cents. I mean, it wasn't going to happen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate y'all coming today.
Thank you.
I'll move to the standing committee agendas in the order they appear in the packet. That would begin with Mr. Salzer.
Our committee yesterday and a few other guests toured the jail with the services of Mr. Asbell as well as some of his staff. And he gave you a sad story. I can give you a sad story about the capital needs out there because they are horrendous. They need a new roof. They need a new kitchen. They need a new flooring in their booking room, which is right there off the entrance. And they need a ring road. They've got all sorts of water problems, and that leads to some of his problems of his people who are there at the jail, both working as well as inmates. They've got 90 cells that are not in operation. So these were just a few of them, and also air handlers. They've not had a new air handler since the building and the addition to that building were constructed. That was 1985 and 87 was with the addition. So he told you his problems right there. Those are just some of the problems capital-wise. And we didn't see all of the jail. And some of us who did tour probably came to the conclusion, let's take the rest of our money. We're building a new health center out here, which is great, and moving a couple of our, of course, government bodies into that. Let's build a new jail. We might as well build the people of Peoria County 2 buildings, and they can drive by those and see them all the time. And then all the people that need roads and so forth, the improvements and so forth, they're left out. But anyway, Brian and his group was very kind to us. We enjoyed the information that he gave to us. I won't say we enjoyed it. We appreciated him taking the time and rendering that service to us. But anyway, we got 5 resolutions to look at. If I can take a moment and look at my notes here. I better get my glasses on so I can possibly see. All 5 of them come from the Highway Department. And the first one, if you read here, it's got to do with a grant and the hiring of a engineering firm that the Highway Department's looking at trying to do. They're trying to get what is called a rural grant from the federal government. So they submitted an application, and right now the $30,000 will come from our money from special projects. Now we're looking at their recommendation, which is Hanson. Hanson has done a lot of work for us in the past. I think one of the big ones that we had recently was down there off of in that Bartonville area. But they have applied for this grant through the Department of Transportation. That is the U.S. Department of Transportation. Has to do with a road connecting up with Glassford and the hill going down to Route 24. And this project is needed. It's heavily traveled. They've got over 2,000 vehicles. Probably much of that comes by way of truck traffic, coming by way of the Akron seed company out there by Brimfield. But anyway, they are recommending to us that we give them the power to hire Hanson if this whole grant comes through. So we're recommending to the board that Hanson be the engineering firm. The second one has to do with the use of a motor fuel tax, and it has to do with the marking material. Now, one thing that we learned was this marking material that we use for our roads and so forth, it's very scarce. And last fall, I think it was about September, October, somewhere in there, they tried to get bids on it. They couldn't get a bid at all, but they eventually got one recently, and we're going to recommend that the motor fuel tax be used for the marking material that they're going to have to purchase, and this will be applied by the city of Peoria because we are in an intergovernmental agreement with them. So all of our county roads, those in the city as well as outside the city that are county roads, the city will apply this substance. The name of that company, incidentally, was Colorado Paint Company. I think they told us it was out around Aurora, Colorado. I don't know the geography of Colorado, but somebody said it's near Denver. The third one had to do with the purchase of aggregate up in the area of Halleck Township. They want to reconstruct the road up there, and so the $140,000 that is going to be spent there will come out of the township motor fuel tax, which our engineer, Amy, of course, she's responsible for that. There was only one bid on that, and that was the bid from Galena Road and Gravel Company. Looking at the last two really involve Dry Run Creek, and we found out that under this, the county engineer, she has applied for a grant by way of the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, and they are giving us 60% of the amount for the project, and this, we've discussed, some of the problems of that, because there's a couple other businesses that really, one business, I should say, and one government body that is going to be involved in bearing some of the cost of this as well. This is going to be upfronted by the Keystone money, which will all be returned to the fund when everything is paid off. But under this, the sanitary district, as well as the PDC, which is no longer, owned by PDC, but they're still involved in it. But it's kind of west of the bridge, and this money will all be upfronted, $730,000 by said Peoria County through the Keystone money, and then the three bodies that I mentioned, Peoria County and also PDC, as well as the sanitary district, will end up dividing the amount that is needed to complete the whole project. It'll be about $97,000 for each one of them. The fourth or the fifth one has to do with hiring again an engineering firm, and this firm, of course, will handle the engineering along Dry Run Creek. And one company had already been working on this for PDC because they had some problems with fuel and so forth with the heavy rains and also the flash flooding and things like that. And so Burke was who they had. And we are adding to this the company of Moore and Kerr. So Moore and Kerr and Burke will continue to work as the engineers on this project, and that $40,000 for that will be shared by all three of the groups that are involved in this. Questions?
Thank you, Mr. Salzer. Mr. Ricker?
Yeah, this month for Ways and Means, one of the informational items we had, I'll just highlight, was that the Elections Commission started early election or early voting last Friday using their new hardware and election voting equipment. So we're off to a good start. Just so making people aware that we do have new equipment, new process. I think it's started off fairly well from what we heard from Mr. Bride. But for people, just awareness that the polls are open for early vote. We had two resolutions. We had our typical resolutions for property delinquent taxes, and we had 2 months. We had the month of April and the month of May's delinquent taxes. That was unanimously approved. The second one was one of our townships, Radnor Township, has asked to contract with the county to do tax assessment. Their tax assessor retired. They were not able to hire a tax assessor for property taxes, so they've approached the county if we would contract with them through an intergovernmental agreement. And so we did approve to pursue that contract for a value of $33,600 a year. So the action was to go ahead and approve moving forward to negotiate and work the terms of the agreement, the intergovernmental agreement between Peoria County and Radnor Township. That was our second item. That's all I had, sir.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments for Mr. Ricker? Seeing none, we'd move to land use and Mr. Dillon.
We had a 4-minute meeting for 200-acre land split of 70 and 130, and it needed some frontage, so we gave them a waiver for road frontage.
Thank you for that 4 minutes. I think you need to forfeit your pay for the month. That doesn't seem like you earned it, sir. Thank you. Sure it does. Mr. Renault.
Thank you, sir. We didn't have any resolutions this month. However, we will have one next month from the state's attorney's office, who's looking to acquire some digital evidence storage software. We also, I'm happy to announce that we have the position posted for our Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. So if anybody knows of anybody who has the requirements for that job, send them our way.
It's excellent. Thank you. Mr. Rosenbaum, Public Safety and Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had one resolution, Family Violence Coordinating Council grant for $39,000. It was a reoccurring grant that we approved. No budget was needing to be changed or anything. And then, of course, we also had the sheriff come in instead of at our committee. He came into executive to talk to everybody. He and I had a lengthy conversation later last week about it. So hopefully we can put our heads together and come up with something to help him on this to get this situation resolved. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Rosenbaum? Seeing none, we'll be back to Mr. Fennell. Jim?
We had one resolution, and that was a continuation of the Headington Oaks bonds that we had the 30-day notice, and we had no objectors, so that moves on to with unanimously approved here and moves on to our regular board meeting for approval.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Fennell? Seeing none, we would be at miscellaneous. I see no hands. I wanted to raise the question after hearing from our energy aggregator today whether the body felt like we could just leave the communications on this subject laissez-faire, just as they are. I mean, I learned some things, and I think of myself as being a little bit in the know about this just today. But whether we create any kind of communication for our citizen customers, since we are the maker of the contracts, and since we're not making a contract, we have a lot of our citizen ratepayers who are now going to face the Ameren rate. And I'm not besmirching Ameren in any way. It is what it is. But should we just leave this unattended, or should we create some kind of common sense communication that we mail to our taxpayer citizens, starting with Ms. Groves-Allison and Mr. Rosenbaum?
I've gotten a lot of questions on it, so I think it would be helpful to get something that they know isn't a scam or a fraud because it's got Peoria County's logo on it. They know that this is an explanation of maybe what they have seen in their mailboxes.
You so you're describing something that's come out by mail as well already?
I'm saying just things they've heard, whether they've received it in their mailbox, read it on Facebook. People are kind of confused right now, so I think it would help to get something from the county.
Okay, but make sure we put our logo on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So it looks official.
Yeah,
Mr. Rosenbaum.
I would say just to that point, Mr. Chairman, not to interrupt Mr. Rosenbaum, but
Sure.
we can absolutely look at doing something like that. You know, I think many of your constituents' questions really started to peak when they received their notice from Home Field Energy, which is actually the supplier, that the rates would be changing. We can either work with Home Field directly, which they should be used to seeing, or we can look at doing something ourselves, whether it be a postcard or something.
Well, somebody has the address of the customer. We generally have the address of the taxpayer.
Correct.
So I'm not sure they're one for one.
Correct.
Okay.
So
Mr.
we
Rosenbaum?
would have to partner with Homefield in some way.
I'll go along with Jennifer. I've had at least two constituents call me about it and ask me, and since I didn't go with that with my home, I just stayed with Ameren. I hadn't read the letters, so if we could either go with them or put it out ourselves or use the media somehow to let them know what's going on, to kind of explain what we heard today, and to maybe let them, how you asked what it was going to cost you. Hypothetically, we could put that formula maybe into it so that give them an idea what their costs might be, because by the time I figured out, if they had that $62.50 in from the first part, you were at $250 for your hypothetical household. So
Sure.
kind of let them know what to brace for, because if you know what to budget for, it helps a little bit more than if you just get the bill and have that sick feeling.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Pastucia?
And just to clarify, this, as far as this body, that's going to affect county residents. And then-
Unincorporated residents, yes.
And the city of Peoria is the one that we're in, it's a separate contract?
Each municipality has its own separate contract.
Okay.
So, sort of head nodding, do you see communication to be an important thing for us to construct with Good as our partners on it? I don't want to make the issue bigger, but I really think that this is going to catch people in a really ugly way. That much of a rate increase, given the inflationary environment we live in, the number of folks that really can't afford higher rate costs like that because of fixed incomes, et cetera. Ms. Daly?
I've had a lot of questions in the office from constituents, and I think if you listen carefully to what they're saying, there are ways to write this so people who are not in the industry can understand it. And, you know, for one thing, if you don't have enough renewable energy to take the place of the supply that you just got rid of, what do people think is going to happen there? And they said that in a way in which I'm not confident that if you hadn't read all these things, you would actually understand what they're saying.
The how is different than the what, though. What I'm trying to get to here is what is about to happen, not how or why. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, then forget it.
The sort of story behind taking plants offline and us not getting enough renewable stuff to replace it, and that driving market factors. I think that much you might be referring to. I'm trying to prepare the ratepayer for the change from the county's point of view, since we're the one that created the contract with Good Energy. So I think we can blend a little bit of what you're talking about, but what it's causing us to do is to have an opinion, and I would just like to be as fact-based as possible, an opinion as to why the rates are changing. I'd like to stay out of that because it starts to feel a little political to me. Now I'm creating more questions. It's for Mr. Ricker, then Dr. Blair, then Ms. Bastucia, then Mr. Fennell.
I think your ask is a good question about what's our role as a county in communicating and learning more about it as we talk. Are we looking at maybe targeted communication to those subscribers today who subscribe to this service, as opposed to a general media push to push out a general communication? So is it targeted to those who subscribe? Is that kind of our thought?
That's my thought.
Yeah, so there's multiple ways we can do it. You know, obviously we can do direct mail piece. We can do press releases, which we have done jointly with the city two or three times on this specific topic. But then we're at the mercy of the media to actually pick up that press release. There's general and/or targeted social media that we can do with geofencing and whatnot as well. So there's multiple ways we can deliver the communication, including, you know, a direct mailer to our constituents, the constituents covered by our contract, which, that's roughly 15,000 households in the unincorporated areas.
Right.
But just thinking of the follow-up, so if I'm a recipient, I receive a communication with the Peoria County logo on it because I am a subscriber to the service. If I don't get enough information to understand a little bit of background, I'll be on the phone calling somebody. You're going to generate
I know.
potential more discussion than we really are prepared to respond as a county, because we're kind of the in-between person of there, in-between party of this service, right? We're not the ones that go out and bid on it and do what the services are doing. So I'm a little cautious about what door you open, because we're not the knowledgeable experts on it.
Well, I think it's possible for us to point them to a place for additional information in that correspondence as well. More comprehensive information as to the why. We could point them to Good's website, let them explain it, and work with them to explain it. So I don't think you can cover all the bases, but I do see us opening the door to some adverse response through there's our logo on there, and now we're talking about a rate increase, and then people just conflate the two and say it's Steve Ricker's fault. My county board member, to what extent is he complicit in this? Didn't mean to use you as an example, but others, I think I saw Dr. Blair.
This goes with the communication strategy, but we know that the highest weather-related deaths are related to heat, and if people's energy costs are going to go up, they're less likely to use air conditioning. So part of this, do we have things to help people if, like cooling centers or something? Is that something that can be at least put on the webpage to direct them to?
So the county does not have those. The city of Peoria and other municipalities do have services like cooling centers and actually programs, and they use some of their entitlement dollars to fund and pay for those programs. We do not have anything like that.
Kate, then Jim.
I guess I was gonna ask if we could do something jointly with the city, and try to get it into more of a general media push, because I think that people need to know that and not be surprised in the mail when they get their bill, or it just comes out of your bank account and then you don't have enough money for groceries. So
Mr. Fennell, then Mr.
I was just a
Dillon.
little confused by Scott's comment that, each one of these municipalities had their own contract, but weren't they pretty much piggybacked as the same?
The pricing and the supplier are all identical, but the way the law is written, each municipal government and each county government has to have their own contract with the supplier. But us and the 13 municipalities in Peoria County all have the same supplier at the same rate.
So Good's job was to aggregate all those contracts. Mr. Dillon?
Andrew, I know, like you just said, the 13 municipalities and us, we're all at the same the county, we're all at the same meeting when they rejected the bids. I know my dad as a mayor was there for that. So I think your communication plan on exactly that is important, especially if they're after next week and they don't buy at the right time and it has to revert back to Ameren for the next year, to explain to them or why they're back with Ameren on that. But I also think it's important, if we're just communicating with the city of Peoria, to also make sure that the same information is being delivered to Chillicothe, Bartonville, West Peoria, so that the message is spread all across the county on a consistent basis. Because I know a couple of the municipalities I've talked to have asked for information that the city and the county have given out so that I could forward it along to them to try to explain it. So even when we just talk about the county portions, remember, most of us represent the city or cities, so we also have to try to explain it to those residents too, because you will get the calls from them also.
Well, Scott can work with the city on developing common language of a communication, but I think the communications need to be separate. And I think we can share the communication with those other governmental units.
That's all I'm saying, is each the same, give it to West Peoria, give it to Chillicothe, like we're gonna do it coordinated with Peoria. I'm with your plan on it, but just make sure all the other community, smaller towns have that same data, and then they can decide how they want to distribute it to their.
It makes sense. It makes sense for them all to act, quite frankly, work together on a common language.
And we got
So-
some time, because if the market's not till next week, we basically have a couple this week, next week, to try to draft some sort of message, because we'll know a lot more whether they reject that bid or take that bid next week.
I think Mr. Ricker's point is instructive, though. We run the risk, okay, of stepping on our toes here by trying to be the nice people to tell folks, get ready for changes in your bill. But I think to Ms. Pastucha's point, when you auto-deduct your power bill from your checkbook, and suddenly it's 2.5 or 3 times what it was, that can be quite impactful to some people, which is why I think we have an obligation to let people know that rates are going up precipitously. Anyone else? Ms. Duncan?
In regards, definitely in agreement to the communication aspect of it that has been going forth. But in the midst, if it's possible to, as it was explained to us, how would take half and break it down and then multiply it by 3. I
Sure.
believe as we have received those letters, be upfront. Yeah, the increase is going to happen. They've told us that. And then just the very fact, how much? Okay, I'm going to go into my bank account, or I can figure out how much I can pay, or how much I can go and get money from somewhere else. But tell me up front about how much will it cost me. And I didn't see that in the letter that I received.
No, I didn't either, which is kind of why all this is important for us to talk about.
Yeah.
The consequences were really not described to where a common person could understand them,
Exactly.
a regular person could understand them. Are there still circuit breaker programs available to help folks with energy assistance? Is that a state-funded thing, Jennifer? Okay, so Scott, that's kind of something that might be helpful to include is for more information on circuit breaker programs. That's help with paying your power bill. All right, we've been here a long, long time today. Thanks, Phil. Just good. I wanted to ask you if your meeting at the jail is something that the rest of us should follow up on. I was unable to attend.
I'm sure he would become available for anybody, that.
How many folks did you have from the board?
I'm going to say we had about eight. I think there's about 8 people. We had another lady. We had our committee. I guess there was 3, and we had a lady. We had Mr. Ricker here, and was there somebody else? Maybe it was 6.
Well, if it would be helpful to the sheriff and you'd be so inclined to lead another group, I would offer that up.
I didn't hear you. I was listening to Jimmy.
If you would be willing to offer up another tour, I'd be willing to take it. I just had my own board meetings to attend for my day job.
Like I said, we didn't see everything out there. He didn't have time because we had to break off for our meeting.
Okay, got it. Thank you, everyone. Anything else under miscellaneous? It's been a long but instructive meeting today. Ms. Pastucha.
Sorry, just want to get in one little tidbit. Springdale Cemetery on Saturday is having a race. It's a 5K. It's at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then we're having some entertainment and refreshments at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then our traditional Memorial Day ceremony at 10 o'clock, which we haven't done for a couple years. So we're looking forward to the Saturday morning events at the cemetery.
Thank you. It's a great thing. Thank you for your leadership there. We would be adjourned at 4:13.